Welcome everyone to the Collective Trauma Summit preview event. My name is Kasia Hübl, and some of you may recognize me as one of the hosts of the Collective Trauma Summit. We are very excited to be here with you for the fourth Collective Trauma Summit. Now I'm excited to welcome Thomas next, and for those of you who do not know Thomas, he's a teacher, author, and international facilitator whose lifelong work integrates the core insights of the great wisdom traditions and mysticism with the newest discoveries of science. Since the early 2000s, Thomas has been leading large-scale events and courses that focus on the healing and integration of trauma, with a special focus on the shared history of Israelis and German. At least that was the starting point, and I would say it's spreading as more and more cultures and countries join the field. Thomas has worked with tens of thousands of people worldwide through workshops, multi-year training programs, and online courses. And of course, this being the fourth summit that Thomas has hosted, and some of us have been involved in, we've seen a lot grow over time, and we're also looking forward to share some of those learnings and next steps that are coming up. And with that, I'm really pleased now to hand over to you, Thomas, to share more about the upcoming summit before we start the panel conversation. Over to you.
A very warm welcome to everybody who's joining us here, and also to Laura, Matthew, Ruby, our summit team. And we will bring you the summit this year a bit closer to your hearts as a preview today. And before we do that, I would love to share a little bit about why collective trauma, why these summits, why collective healing movement. So, as Kasia already shared 20 years ago, kind of collective trauma met me in my work through the groups and the processes that emerged in the groups, and ever since I have been studying and deepening the process work around collective trauma in different parts of the world. And 4 years ago, I had this strong impulse: we have to have a summit. We have to spread the word. And in the last 3 summits, we reached over 250,000 people. And I believe that the word collective trauma, that of course existed before, but became much more like a term that's being used and is kind of creating an awareness that we all are awakening into more and more. The collective trauma is a systemic issue, that we all have been born into a world that was traumatized already. So trauma didn't just happen to me, but it happened to my ancestors, and it happened within the culture that I was born into and have been conditioned by. And so the more I saw the collective trauma processes in my work, the more it got clear to me that we have to address the systemic aspect globally if you want to also track or deal with large-scale issues that we have, one of it being racism, one of it being climate change and climate crisis. And I think so the summits, on the one hand, create kind of a global information, a global conference in a way, but it's not a conference in the sense of talking about it. We are actually creating an alchemical ecosystem. And that ecosystem is in a way the resource. That's why for me the summit is like a celebration. Why is it a celebration? Because there's so many people around the world that do fantastic work, and we see it as the role of our summit to highlight a lot of the good work that's happening, because otherwise it seems like there are mountains of trauma and we are very quickly creating a lot more of it every day. But there is also already like a lot of shining resource in the world that deals with collective trauma in many, many ways through many different approaches. And so we see it as part of our journey to give a stage to many of those amazing approaches, work, passions, art, and many other ways that found ways to address the unspeakable, to address that which is often hidden by nature within our awareness. And I just came back from 5 days, spending 5 days immersing myself into the Venice Biennial, like one of the biggest global art exhibitions in the world, and with international artists from all around the world. And it was amazing. And I see the Biennial every other year, thanks to my wife, Judith, who is an international artist, and kind of took the veils of ignorance of my eyes, because I wasn't so immersed into art before our marriage, but now I am, and I'm actually very passionate about it. And so what I saw is also like the art exhibitions, big art exhibitions also show the zeitgeist around the world. And many themes that we cover in the summit are very much represented in the biennial this year, and also the one that happened 3 years ago. And it's a deep space of contemplation. It's a deep space of injecting one's own creativity into very painful situations, parts of our culture, parts of our lives. And so I see the summit also as a way to not only talk about collective trauma, but to have an immersed experience. And everybody who speaks doesn't just speak about it, but transmits the power of the work, the power of the often decades of experience into the space. And I think that that's a very powerful space to be part of, and to let oneself drink and see how that lands in all of us. So a little bit later we will share with you how that landed in us, and what was everybody's experience here doing the interviews and being kind of deeply immersed in our speakers' worlds and experiences. And then I want to share a few more words. I'm convinced that our theme this year is creating a global healing movement, because in order to heal collective trauma, we need a movement. It needs many of us to create the collective coherence that's needed in order to awaken first, to create awareness, and then integrate and grow from the legacy that we haven't integrated yet. And also the missing ethical learning that is buried in the ice of our collective traumatizations will give us the inner maturity to deal with the contemporary issues that we see. And so a collective healing movement starts with gathering our tribe. And I think gathering our tribe is, when we gather our tribe, no matter what we do in the world, it's coming in contact with people that there is no convincing, there's no learning about. It's like our hearts know already that we belong together, and there is something that we want to do together. And that's very powerful, no matter if that's technology, if that's collective trauma, if that's medicine or any other science, like when our heart's burning. So our hearts here, with many, many conversations in the summits over the last 4 years, are all exciting. Every interview is, for me personally, a deep learning. It's a pleasure. It's exciting. It's a celebration, even if we speak about often very painful and difficult subjects, because the lights of our souls kind of join and create a bigger space together that no one can create alone. And I think that's the power of collective healing. And the summit is also speaking to like a principle that I'm very passionate about, that's liquefying our world. Like how we more and more collectively wake up to see that certain structures in our society, they are not structures, they are frozen. And when we liquefy those, we liberate a lot of power and creativity and life energy that is bound in the collective trauma structures that we need in order to build a new world that is more fluid than the one that we see now. So fluidity and liquefying our societies, our cultures, our world, I think is a big part of our current growth process. And that adaptability, that flexibility, that capacity to respond, that relationality, because relationality is based on flow, it's based on resonance, it's based on attunement. So all of it is basically part of what we explore here in the summit, and the liquefying, I believe, is also happening in the conversation themselves. And so the term trauma has been more and more dominant in the last decades in our cultures, and also in the psychotherapy fields, and in many fields in neuroscience and social sciences. But I think the trauma seen as an individual, as an ancestral, and as a collective interdependence, that individual, ancestral, and collective trauma are not separate things, but they belong together. Like they are one web, same as we all connected, and maybe trauma creates separation, and that separation is what we often suffer from. That's why relationality, collective spaces are so healing, because we can come together and heal together. And I think that's what the summit is also about, and that the individual, ancestral, and collective trauma healing is what the summits want to present, want to show, want to transmit. And I think we did a great job in the last years, and I'm sure this summit will provide an equally exciting space with all the speakers that I talked to and that we talked to so far. So it's really exciting, and I think I want to just finish with like the power of attunement. That relationality and attunement are like the main remedies. And I think in our world, the world sometimes might really look like pretty dark, and it gets heavy, and sometimes it's depressing to see what's happening in the world. But relationality, like shared spaces, that shared spaces are actually increasing our capacity to deal with whatever we are dealing with in our world. And that's why last year we had over 100,000 people tune into the summit. That's a big shared space. And even if some people listen only to a few talks, some people listen to many talks, that doesn't really matter. It's being part of, and also being part of a summit is giving something into the summit. So the summit is not just like transmitting information, it actually includes everybody who's listening. And that's the principle of interdependence. And I would love to open now the space for us here to maybe hear more from everybody. And then at the end, I will maybe share a few more conclusions. But I hand it over to you, Kosha. And if you want to start us off, and then we hear from everybody here. What's your experience of the summit? What are the highlights? What are the inspirations? And please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Thomas. And just to give you a short introduction to who will be here with us on the panel today, we'll start off with Laura Calderon de la Barca, who is a psychotherapist, cultural analyst, and collective collective healing researcher based in Mexico City. And then we'll move on to Ruby Mendenhall, who's based in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. And she's a professor of sociology and African American studies, but also associate dean for diversity and democratization of health innovation. Does amazing work. Then we have Matthew Green, who's from London, England, and is a journalist and author, and has really helped to open the strand around journalism in the summit. And again, my name is Kasia Joubert. I live in Scotland at the moment, originally from South Africa, and I am the CEO of the Pocket Project, which you will hear more about later. There are also 3 other summit hosts that you'll hear about during the summit who aren't here with us now, but we just want to name them and invite you to watch out for inspiring conversations with Dr. Angel Acosta, the principal consultant at Acosta Consulting, Robin Alfred, an executive coach, facilitator of transformational fields, and purpose consultant, and Anna Molitor, who is our poetry curator of the summit, doing a beautiful work bringing together arts and poetry, but who's also a somatic healing practitioner and a group facilitator. And with that, I would like to hand over to you, Laura, to kick us off. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Kasia. And yeah, just so excited to be here and welcome everyone also on my behalf. This is the 4th year that I'm participating. And one of the things that I was very interested in seeing with the work that we're doing is wanting to invite a change in discourse, you know, including more the understanding of collective trauma. And the way I understand language is that it helps us distinguish something from the whole of reality so that we can engage with that more precisely. And I took a little bit of time to do some research, and I looked at the New York Times, and I found that the term collective trauma shows up 111 times in their articles. And it's interesting, it only shows up since 1973. But out of those 111 times, 59 of those are since 2018. And 39 of those are since 2020. So these past, couple of years have been really significant in the increase of awareness around collective trauma. And it seems important that, journalism and, this particular place, but not just the New York Times, there's a social dimension to the discourse that is really permeating, and that feels important, that this is not just a movement that we're initiating, where it seems to me we're really touching on the zeitgeist, on what's on the spirit of our times. And so we're kind of riding this wave together. And it seems to me that this gathering of our tribe, which is also what the summit is really an opportunity for us to recharge and be able to move together with this field into bringing healing spaces into our world. And that's the other thing that I'd like to touch on, and that is healing environments. It seems to me that there's like a change happening in the scope of our thinking about healing that feels really essential, where we're moving from thinking about healing from an individual perspective, where, trauma is contained in an individual, to where we really can see that environments are traumatized, cultures are traumatized, and that, along with that, cultures can heal, environments can heal. We really need to relate to the process of healing in a different way. And I think, different people within our, the cohort of people we have interviewed speak to that. One case in point would be Celina de Sola. Celina de Sola is working in Central America with a very powerful initiative where she's doing whole systems work that is in order to support the youth of El Salvador and Guatemala and Honduras to stay in their countries of origin. They are working with the teachers, with the parents, obviously with the youths themselves, but really looking at what is the environment that generates that these people, end up choosing to leave, that the environments are kind of expelling them. And so how can we work with the environment itself so that there's a transformation happening? So I would invite you to take a look there. I would also invite you, I'd also like to talk for a moment about the experience of working with poets, because this year I've got the beautiful opportunity of interviewing some of the poets in the summit. And part of what I find poetry brings is, when we're talking about trauma, sometimes it's really hard to touch these places, even with words. And poetry allows people who have this as one of their, their calling, to find a way to bring about, it becomes a container for those connections to be made to places, where there's so much pain and it's often hard for us to connect to. So using imagination as a container for healing, that's one of the beautiful things that happens. And Monica Soup, for example, is bringing together different moments in time through her poetry, such that elements from the future and from the past can meet, and a healing process can happen through the way that she weaves that. So I'd like to leave it here, because I'd also love to hear from my other fellow panelists. So Ruby, over to you.
Thank you very much. And as a fellow poet, I love how you described it, right? Kind of what poetry can do. So, Thomas, thank you for this opportunity to co-host the summit again. I love the opportunity of learning from others, and even kind of seeing myself grow and expand, and meeting kindred spirits. So everyone, welcome, and look forward to you also getting a chance to grow and expand. And I would say one of the things that spoke to me the most was Nkem's and Deffo's, her definition of health. And she is the founder of Lumis Transforms, and she's the creator of the Resilience Toolkit that offer these really practical exercises to heal from trauma. So her definition says, I believe that the nature of health encompasses far more than just freedom from disease. Health is physical and emotional vitality, flexibility, creativity, and resiliency. It is connection to community and purpose, with the freedom of expression and an ability to find happiness in the face of life challenges, right? Which is often very difficult. And she goes on to say that health is experiencing life from our highest potential and promoting the same well-being in others. And absolutely none of this is possible without a community and systems that nurture support and connection, equity and justice. So I just love that definition, because it speaks to so many of the things from the individual level all the way up to systems and the importance of justice. And so also when I think of kind of one of the most exciting insights, so as I'm interviewing, talking to people and listening, and I'm like, oh, Thomas is creating this ecosystem of Black people from various backgrounds around the world who are trying to dismantle these systems of oppression, who kind of talk about, Thomas said, the unspeakable and often hidden trauma that's associated with this oppression, and trying to build something new, right? Trying to create something that is not there, and trying to create something that is very difficult to create. And so I just think it's amazing. And I love that as we talk about how we can work together and again, do action. So very excited about that. And then just in terms of some of the speakers, so again, Nkem Ndefo, she has the Resilience Toolkit, and she talks about it as the goal is liberation, and that there's an alchemical resilience, right? So when you do your own personal and collective healing, but then when you're also to see and create something new. So I just think that is very transformative. And then also had the wonderful pleasure of talking with Anith Diawal, who's from the South Sudan, She's faculty at the Center for Mind-Body Medicine. She's a human rights lawyer in South Sudan, and she also founded the NGO called Roots. And what I love about Roots is that she's practicing what we often talk about as Sankofa, right? When you go back and you learn the lessons from the past, and then that helps you to think about the future, create a new future. And so she's working with women to kind of work on their traditional beadwork. And they're creating this beautiful jewelry that also creates wealth for them. And I also see it as she's creating this healing space, these shared spaces, again, as Thomas mentioned, and where they can come together to talk. There, some could also say kind of doing the beadwork is meditative, and the intergenerational knowledge that's exchanged. And that's some of the stuff that we're doing also as we work with young people. So I will leave it there, and then I will hand it over to Matthew.
Thank you very much, Ruby. I'm just basking in the field. Amazing to feel that there's 1,700 people all over the world tuning in to this conversation right now. One of the things that really energized me about the summit was that it's not, as Thomas said, it's not like a conference. I felt that in every conversation, I was seeing and participating in the building of this global healing movement. Every time I walked away from the screen, I felt this kind of surge of energy. You know, people talk about Zoom fatigue during the pandemic. I was actually coming to the summit to kind of top up, actually. I mean, the first conversation we had with Thomas was with Gail Bradbrook and Skeena Rathore, co-founders of Extinction Rebellion, which is a climate and environmental protest movement that erupted in the UK a few years ago and brought London to a standstill through a campaign of non-violent civil disobedience. And frankly, I wondered how this conversation was going to go. You know, you had these two women, real warrior women, they've been arrested for their principles, and they've had this global impact on the climate conversation. And Thomas is bringing mysticism, psychology, neurobiology. And I thought, what's going to come out of this? And it was incredible to see in front of my eyes this understanding emerging that we were all working on the same thing. We're all recognizing we're carrying this grief, this fear, this anxiety, this hopelessness at times over the climate crisis. But we're finding ways to come together, build these coherent fields, and transmute that leaden, that heavy energy into constructive, emergent, innovative action. And so I was literally watching a kind of new vocabulary, a new conceptual framework emerging in this conversation, which we can all take forward and use. On the media front as well, it was a real honor to invite a colleague of mine, a former colleague of mine, Dean Yates, who I worked with in Baghdad back in 2004, just as the insurgency against US forces was really starting to rage. And he went through a terrible series of traumatic experiences and moral injury in Iraq. And it's something he's spoken about before, but I felt that we were able together to really understand the pressures that journalists face, how sometimes clinging to this notion of objectivity, the idea that we're somehow outside of the story, can protect us from what we're seeing. But with him, it broke. He broke. He couldn't maintain that fiction anymore. And he went through this profound journey of healing and self-discovery that continues to this day. And he's now going back into these big media institutions, talking about trauma and helping to convert these structures from sometimes institutions that can almost perpetuate trauma if they're not careful about how they report and how they treat their staff, into trauma-informed, even trauma integrating institutions. Similarly, speaking to Dr. Alana Newman from the Dart Center for Journalism and Trauma, we spoke about the relationship between journalism and healing. Can journalism be a form of healing? Are they different things? And I learned so much from that conversation. Likewise, Brian Dorries, creative director of the Theatre of War, who's staged Greek tragedies for communities from military veterans to communities subject to environmental injustice, racial oppression, and right now, with participants in Ukraine, refugees acting parts in these incredible Greek plays that speak to the issues we're facing today across 2,500 years of history. All of this gave me this sense of this kind of global community, this global, like Thomas says, alchemical ecosystem, self-assembling. We could feel the kind of collective intelligence pulling this whole gathering together. And I'm a former journalist, and if I'm going to make one invitation to everyone watching this is, don't watch the news during the summit. Just watch the summit instead and see how you feel at the end of that experiment and what new ideas and inspiration you take away. So it's an honor to take part. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matthew. And I will pick up there. You know, it's just as you just said, that watch the summit instead of the news. And I think what inspires me most in terms of this alchemical network, community, ecosystem, movement that we're creating around the summit is that each of you is an integral part of this. And that as we've gone through the cumulative display of crisis that we've been seeing in the past years, I think many of us have felt deep grief, hopelessness, even depression at moments, really feeling overwhelmed with how can I find the responses? And very easily that leads us to hyperactivation or to apathy, like acting faster and then, you know, maybe breaking down for a while, withdrawing, or, you know, one of the two, maybe sometimes moving from one to the other. And here is a new pathway in this global healing movement that the summit has been catalyzing over the past years, and that this summit is bringing the next impulse to really realize that each of us is or can become an acupuncture point for healing in our circles of influence. And that this starts with turning to ourselves, towards ourselves with love and compassion, like starting here, you know, feeling myself, feeling the messiness, the edges, the places where I don't like to feel myself, where I don't want to acknowledge my ancestry because it's too hard or it's too painful, you know, starting close. But then also realizing really early on what all the cultures around the world have known, that we cannot do this alone. I cannot heal myself alone. As Laura said, we have these healing ecosystems that are growing, healing spaces that we know healing is not individual healing. It's about us healing together. I cannot open my sensitivity to feel you fully if you don't remind me of that in moments where I go into my defense mechanisms. You know, we need to support each other in embracing the parts of us, the parts of our human history that are really hard to embrace, and to maybe shine a soft torchlight, an eye on it, bring our witnessing presence with the self-care and the care for others that it fully deserves. But with this move towards, I would say, soft compassion and precision, I feel that we can really start looking at what so far I feel in the change movements. And I was the CEO of the Global Eco-Village Network before moving to the Pocket Project. But I saw the sand in the system of all our good intentions, all our brilliant solutions, our activities, and then comes the friction, the repetitive cycles, and we're not able to manifest them fully. So, you know, the ability to start looking at the sand in the system, the hidden variable in our societies, in our systems, individual, ancestral, and collective trauma, and to do that together. So I'm so glad you're all here. And I think together we can make real next steps in weaving into this net more communities, cultures, organizations, countries, growing together. And I just want to name a few of the speakers that have impressed me deeply. Maria Lester, who's co-director of Harvard's Global Mental Health Trauma Program, who says that rather than a sense of having to do things on our own and feeling overwhelmed, find your people and stay with them to create healing in the world. So I pray that each of us during the summit may come closer to finding our people and staying with them. And also, to really acknowledge that this is not a uniform movement. We are not uniform, and each of us has our very own, very unique contribution that only we have the exact right ingredients for. And Camille Seaman, who's an artist, and she calls herself a bipolar photographer because she travels from the Arctic to the Antarctic and takes photographs that show also what climate change is changing, but also just the beauty of creation. And she says that our job is to find the thing we do like no other on this planet, our superpower, and use that gift in the service of others. I also want to mention, a bit like Matthew just mentioned, his colleague who was in Baghdad and spoke of that. So if you want to go to some of the harder places, I would invite you to listen to Arne Churn Pond, who's a musician and a human rights activist who survived the killing fields of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia as a child and a teenager, simply by playing music in the camps while the horrific events were happening around him, and came through that with a motivation to bring music to the healing of collective trauma. And I'll end here for now just with a short quote from Bayo Akomolafe, also a friend of mine who I've met several times, and a philosopher and trans public intellectual. Just amazing poetry and intellectuality coming together in his work. Don't miss the interview with him, who says, maybe urgency is inviting us to slow down, to listen, to see who is here with us, to consult, and then to respond to glimpses of possibility that peek through the fabric of the moment. Yeah, so thank you to all of you for being here with us. And back to you, Thomas.
Thank you. This was amazing to just to hear, like, on the one hand, your excitement, and so it gives us a sense of the interdisciplinary nature of the exploration. Like when we look at collective trauma, we look at it from all different kind of angles and disciplines, and it's a very rich exploration. And I also, like, two things come up when I listen to you, and then maybe I have a few questions. One is, we call it a healing movement because movement is the core essence of health. Like it has a reason why we say we're in a flow when it's flowing. We're not saying we're in a flow when it's deeply stuck. And so movement is actually, we can understand a global healing movement as a movement that many of us are doing something together. But we can also see it as unleashing more and more the original movement of life. And that's true it's true for the biosphere, that's true for our societies, that's true for the entire planet and beyond. But that every trauma healing is actually an incredible win-win-win for the system. Because not only do we expand our perspective, because integration means integrating a split of part of our past so that my perspective is growing. So I'm growing. And then responding a bit to you, Ruby, when you read this beautiful quote about health, which I think is very beautiful. So what is health? But the one question is also, how can we be health for others? Like, how am I then? I am also an environment. It's not just about my health. Yeah. It's my health, but it's also like, how can I be an environment that is healthy for others?
Yeah,
and I think maybe you can speak a little bit to that. That how, health is often seen, it's my health. Am I healthy? Or am I health for others?
Yes. Yes. I love that you brought that up. So, and in Kim's again, she says, it is connection to community and purpose with the freedom of expression and an ability to find happiness in the face of life's challenges. And I think community is super important. I'm actually getting trained to lead circles. So we talked about the importance of circles and having these healing spaces, from the Emotional Emancipation Circle with Enola Aird and Cheryl's Grill. And one of the things we talk about is that we are each other's medicine, right? And we have to find out who said it. So it's not coming from me, it's coming from the circle, that we are each other's medicine. And when I hear that, it's the communion. It's when we talk, when we say, these are the things in society that are wounding us, right? The trauma is chronic, it's continuous, it's brutal, right? It's deadly even. And to say these are the things that are harming us, and then these are the things that we're going to do about it, the things that we have the power to change. And then I noticed, so another aha, kind of in that context, I was like, oh, when I talk about these things and when I say it, there's something that happens. And I noticed with others too. So I got to see in another way the power of coming together, of talking, being in community. And when you say, right, the people, these kindred spirits, right, who feel it. And as you say, we don't have to define it, or like, do you feel it? Do you see it? Right? Like, we all see it, we all feel it. And it's very powerful in transforming us. And then that's the alchemy, right? Like, it's something that's greater than us. So I would say all of that is really important. And in all our movements, right, especially in Black history, right, from the abolitionist movement to the civil rights movement, Black Lives Matter, all of that, the force that comes when people say no, right? Like, this is not the way it will be. This is what we see as a new future. And even sometimes when I just get like, oh my gosh, right, these systems, right, it's so hard. I think about, I am not still enslaved, right? Like, that my ancestors and they were able to change it. They were able to, as Maya Angelou says, we talked about the beauty of poetry in her poem, that I am the dream and the hope of the slave, that they were able to see me, not an enslaved person, right, with some level of agency over my life. So I think community does all that. And that's why I think it's important for us to think about these spaces, even for young people, right? We're asking them, where's your space, right? Your space may not look like my space. And sometimes our spaces may need to be together. When I did interviews, the young people were like, yeah, older people, they think, that we were having kids young and we're starting this stuff, but a lot of this was around even before we started. And I was like, that's true, right? Like, we need to have these back and forth. And the last thing I'll say is also in community. I think you mentioned it too, a knowledge transfer. In America, I think we need a wealth transfer, but at the least a knowledge transfer where this information about, like you're saying, flow, neuroscience, body, mind, spirit, connection, the importance of being in community, the sense of belonging, what happens when you're on the margins, how that wears and tears on your body, but then how you can overcome that. All of this information needs to be out in the masses. And I think, like with community, as one example of it, with the community health workers, that's part of the healing on a collective level, and then also individual, and I would even argue ancestral as well.
Yeah, that's very powerful, and I want to just right away pick that up and maybe play the ball back to Matthew for a moment, because like our narratives are fragmented, our histories are fragmented, because I believe that history, as we look at it, is kind of frozen past often, and in the frozen past, the non-integrated history has to be by definition fragmented. And so when we look at it, then global fluidity, like liquefying our global society in order, for example, to deal with climate change, is a liquefying of the fragmented narrative that is fixated through trauma. And it starts to float together to create a cognitive, an emotional, a physical, a spiritual, a relational, coherent narrative, basically. And so we could also say, and I'm curious, Matthew, how you look at what also Ruby finished with, like that information system, like data and information is flowing more fluidly through integrated systems and through integrated nervous systems. And when we are more fragmented, so information gets stuck. So in a way, if you look at this like a trauma-informed, which is one topic, one of a more central topic this year also in the summit, is like, how does trauma-informed journalism look like? That the information system around the world is flowing so that it's part of our flourishing. And maybe you can speak a little bit to that, how any thoughts that come up in you or what you heard also in your interviews.
Well, what's coming to me as you're speaking, Thomas, about the media system is that so much of it is actually frozen. We're frozen in this idea of reporting on the world out there as if reality is behind a glass screen and we're observers completely detached from what we're writing about. And of course, we do need to be detached. We need to be fair. We need to be balanced in our coverage. But there's something else that I'm witnessing among my colleagues right now. And Stephanie Fu spoke to this, the author of What My Bones Know, who was a producer on This American Life, who I interviewed, as well as Dean Yates, who was a bureau chief in Iraq for Reuters. They both recognized that they needed inner healing. They were carrying so much trauma that they actually couldn't function in their jobs. They just hit a wall. But what they've done is that they've, in their own ways, opened up conversations among their colleagues who are also realizing this same truth, that we're all kind of encased in this, almost like it's like psychic sludge. we're all watching through, like you say, we're looking at broken glass through broken glass, and that's true of those of us who work in the media as much as it is the rest of us who were born into this traumatized society. But what we're seeing is these kind of little islands emerging, these conversations happening where journalists are acknowledging this reality. They're starting to work on themselves. They're recognizing that we need to not only be healing ourselves as individuals, but not just getting better and going back to work to kind of get back on the treadmill. We go through these breakdowns, these dark nights of the soul, and we go back into our institutions, trying to shift them, trying to bring more space for this conversation, trying to understand the role the media plays in either essentially amplifying the trauma narrative or bringing in other stories that show how trauma can be healed. And just end with what Dean said, one of the most successful things he did at Reuters, huge news agency, was invite colleagues to write blogs about their own struggles, whether it was with traumatic experience, burnout, stress, a loss that they'd suffered. And just through that simple action, it sent ripples. He would get dozens of emails in response to each new blog that went up, and the whole culture subtly started to shift. Now that battle's not over. There's still a lot of trauma architecture in the media that we need to dismantle kindly, carefully, and delicately. But there are glimmers of change, and I really feel like the summit is helping to amplify that and really spur that evolutionary process in the media and beyond.
Yeah, it speaks also beautifully to one of the trauma symptoms is the world that is externalized because it can't inform us. So like where we are hurt, we look at the world, as you said, through the broken glass, through separation. So that part of the world can't inform me. I don't have a form of that part of the world in myself. So I see it intellectually, but I can't really feel it, sense it, create sense making. So that's why I think that that's where a lot of much deeper information system can be put in place, and I think that's a very interesting avenue to follow, how we are being informed holistically, not just intellectually, about what's happening in the world. And the other thing is maybe because that ties into if information is dissociated or if information really informs us as a whole human being, which sparks compassion, which is not always easy to digest. It means that we need to install digestion spaces in our organizations, in our companies, in our institutions, in our cultures, in our states, like that we have spaces to digest. That's a function that it's way undervalued. It looks like, oh, that's also should be there. No, it's a very important function of collective health. And if we don't have that, it's a sign of our hurt. And then, like what you, Matthew, said at the end, is speaks also to what you said, Kosha, before, like when you spoke about the Global Eco-Village Network as an example, and I think that example is so pandemic around the world that we all know that often we have great ideas and we can partly manifest them, but then there is that sand in the engine because we are trying to solve something that we can't feel because it hits the limits of our own traumatization. And then there is a lot of effort involved to make things happen. And maybe you can speak a bit to maybe your experience or also maybe what came up in the summit about that sand in the engine that we struggle with, or also like what we label as dysfunctional because we actually cannot be connected and in touch with the process that is. And then it shows up as a problem that is against our climate change efforts, a problem that is against other political efforts or other social efforts. Maybe you can speak a bit to how we often put patches of ideas onto reality that are actually not congruent with the situation of reality, with the life living process.
Yeah, beautiful. I mean, I'll just speak from my direct experience first, yeah, and then see how that directly relates to the question. But I had this experience of shifting from one intentional community to another. So I've traveled, worked in 48 countries, really gone to many, many communities around the world, and all of these were started up by visionaries with an incredible vision. And I would actually say that they all had a high power of manifestation, because otherwise they wouldn't even exist. So they all existed and they were all doing relatively well. But what I most noticed, and this was over, my 30 years of living, being, teaching, sharing in communities, was that as they developed over time, it always seemed, and I think we see this in many organizations as well, that are started from a high impulse, that it seems as if they reach a ceiling. And, these are communities that have a big psychological tool set, like for processing stuff. They're very good at processing stuff. But I could see that there's a limit where it feels as if they reach a ceiling and their growth stops. And then it feels like they cycle on a certain level of, you could call it frequency or innovation, and then the founders and key people start moving to the edge of the community to continue their journey of innovation elsewhere. And the communities keep attracting loads of visitors that are deeply inspired what happens there, but it's as if their growth stops. And I have come to realize that this is where we hit the edges of collective trauma, where there are edges that we are not able to see, the absence that we cannot see. And, you know, that is where we become a plaster that is put on something that we cannot fully feel. And it needs a direct looking at that, where I can just say, you know, and maybe to just repeat the story on a different level in the global aspect, where we worked so hard on global representation, on respectful dialogue between the cultures, equal participation, but just the intensity of the trauma of colonialism, of enslavement, of ongoing injustice, the wealth distribution in the world that you were speaking about, Ruby, you know, just the ongoing nature of that, bringing up an intensity of emotions that I would say very simply, we were not able to address. And you often speak about this, Thomas, that, you know, trauma on an individual level is like a strong wind. It's strong. It has a strong energy, but trauma on a collective level is a storm when it really starts blowing in our face. And, you know, that's maybe a question I would like to play back to you for maybe an hour later, is how do we really train up enough people in the world who have that depth of understanding of being able to work with the intensity of collective fields of trauma? Because I feel like we're seeing more and more of them show up, and we're starting the work on them collectively as a humanity. But there's still a lot of wounding happening in the way that we work with it.
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and that since we all have been born into a world that is collectively traumatized, it's not just the blue planet that we see from outer space that looks really romantic and beautiful. It's actually, when you zoom in a bit, you see, and now climate change in a way shows that scars also from outer space, because of the nature being so hurt through the climate change process. But if we really looked at the planet from outer space with all its scars, it would look very different. They're just invisible. And it's like a metaphor for that we have been born into something that we were breathing ever since and living in. And so a lot of it became invisible. And one way of training, and that's also, I think, I said before, the first level of the Collective Trauma Summit was getting the word out. And the second level is like developing that collective healing movement, the collective healing movement that creates some coherence, becomes a space, like an awareness space, many, many of us together, in order for us to support each other, to awaken from, like, to start to see that which is invisible for us. For example, like when we look at society, we might say, oh, we look at society or culture, and what we see is what's happening now. And I would say, no. What we see is a mix of emergent, relational, warm processes that are happening now. And what does it mean, emergent? It means the process itself and the parts in us and the parts in our organizations and the parts in our societies can be updated. An integrated structure in life can be updated all the time, which means it's adaptable. Evolution, if we need to change, we can change. It's fluid. It's not fluid because it cannot build structures. It's a fluid structure that is stable but updatable. But when you look at, so that's one part of our society, and that's where we feel connected, where we feel our purpose, where we feel flourishing, where we feel we create community that is thriving, and so on. But then there are many processes that, in my understanding, are repetitive we had that conversation over and over again. These are non-updatable processes. They are stuck in time. They're stuck in a trauma loop, and they often feel distant. They feel disconnected, non-relational. They don't resonate with. And those processes, like these two kinds of processes together, are being seen as society. And I would say no, as long as we look at like that at society, we miss a major part of life that is a hostage of our past. And if we learn to develop a sensitivity and an awareness how to differentiate those two processes, we begin a massive collective healing process, because we will address it exactly the way it needs to be addressed. But if these two are in one bucket, then we say, oh, certain things are difficult. It's hard to do it. It's hard to develop progress. When it's hard, all my alarm bells need to go off, because it means that I'm not aware of the process that I'm in. And so when we try to create social movements, when we try to create a climate change movement, we often hit the invisible walls of our society. But those are not vicious and bad. Those are defense mechanisms that we don't yet identify as such, as, let's say, a skilled trauma therapist would identify individual symptoms in an individual person that comes to a one-on-one treatment. So we wouldn't take certain symptoms for the thing itself. We see them as symptoms. But I think we are not there yet on a collective level. We still are engaging in polarization and political conversations as if they were real. And they are not real. They are symptoms of a process. And as long as we don't go to the root, I think so that's basically one answer to like the awakening out of like that we learn to see the processes that are actually trauma symptoms or collective defense mechanisms against a lot of collective pain, and they all have their intelligence. Not that they are good or bad, but they need to be identified as such. Otherwise, we experience that always as resistance, as againstness, as difficulties in what we want to express in the world. And maybe, so thank you for circling that back to me, and maybe I can pass it on to you, Laura, maybe, because I know you're also, deeply interested in these systemic processes. Maybe you can speak a bit to that. I think that's a great fit.
Yes, it feels that way, Thomas. And yeah, this is, the thing I am most passionate about. How can we evolve healing practices such that we can address precisely what Kasia was addressing? And that's where this movement in scale towards looking at environments as healing, to me, feels like such an important aspect of the direction in which the global healing movement is starting to incorporate. And this is something that is so well known to indigenous communities the world over, the connectedness to Mother Earth, the connectedness to nature, and how restoring it is even just to be in those natural spaces, right? And also to me, then that connects so profoundly with the topics around the global climate crisis. We are destroying those places that we're needing to be able to heal and maintain our capacity to keep ourselves alive and thrive. But in order for us to then transform our relationship to environments, there is an aspect of something that no one else can give us, but only each one of us can take, which is the courage and the commitment to become part of of those of us who are willing to put our lives on the line to make sure that we give this world the best possibility to really become what it can be, and do our own personal work. It starts with me. It starts with looking at what I'm seeing outside is actually here. And that we each can do in each one of our individual environments. And, and also notice, where do I need the support? Because we can't do it alone. We cannot do it without our individual participation, but, trying to do this alone, to me, that is precisely a symptom of trauma. But part of what is so beautiful about us being together here is precisely this is the gathering of the tribe, or at least one of the gatherings of the tribe for the world right now. This environment, this place, and there is also the aspect of the interactive spaces that we have where people can meet each other and connect and be able to find resonances with others who are walking similar paths. That to me is also a huge contribution, that this is really not just meant as a space for experts to come together and speak, but also for people to come together and, as you were saying, Thomas, to participate, to really be a part of this larger, what to me feels like, it's like we're all neurons who have our own capacity, but that when we come together, it's like a whole other order of existence can then come online, because it's of a collective nature and it needs every single one of us. And what Kasia was saying, each of us also brings our own very specific and distinct capacities, and we cannot do it without everyone who's needed to participate, and that is all of us. So that's part of what I love about being able to be part of this. My own journey started many years ago when I finished my PhD, 2007. I was like, okay, where is everybody else with whom we're going to be doing collective healing? And, there wasn't a lot of people who had been waiting for a long time. And just to see what's happening today is just such an absolute inspiration. So thank you for the opportunity to be part of this. And I love this space. I love you guys. And back to you, Thomas or Kasia. I'm not sure who's next here.
Yeah, thank you. And you're speaking again to I love the term that's coming up in social sciences or in different places now. It's kind of intra-connected. Like we are not just interdependent, we are also intradependent or intra-connected, that we are co-arising out of a much bigger process. And I think that cut-offness from our roots often, especially in the Western tradition, I think in indigenous traditions and mystical traditions, there is still much more connection, but that we are not connected through our embodiment in a felt sense to the deep, what I often call ancient time. Like ancient time means all of our ancestors together culminating in and as us. That's very powerful. If you just see how many lives needed to be lived for us to have this conversation, or for all of us sitting in this space right now, everybody who is listening, like all our ancestors are part of this conversation. But often we experience our individuality or hyper-individuality, or I'm this separate person in a big world. But actually, we are all like amazingly concentrated, like a long ancient stream of history. And I think that also, like collective trauma healing on the one hand is a remedy for separation, of course, but it also opens our own awareness again to not only conceptually understand that we are part of a context, but that we really feel that in every pulse, in every breath, in everything that we do, there is that concentrated liquid of intelligence of all of us. And I think that rootedness in and as the planet also like takes away the dualism that I'm on the planet. Like I'm a separate particle, a person running around on a big game board, versus my body is the planet. But that sense of interconnectedness or intraconnectedness is often not how life feels to us. We can intellectually think about, we're all interdependent, but to experience interdependence, it needs that individual, ancestral, and collective trauma healing. And I think in that, and we also have some conversations around climate change, and I think many of the people that we talk to around climate change understand the importance of that rootedness, that it's not a moral kind of ask that needs to be done, that we should behave in a certain way. It's actually only when it's alive and the felt sense in us that we anyway do what needs to be done in order to, face this climate crisis. And maybe given the time, if anyone wants to comment on something that came up in the conversation that you would love to share, please share it, and then maybe we can finish the conversation with a 5-minute contemplative journey and then end the session. If you have any sparks from the conversation or anything you wanted to share, please.
Yeah, I just like to say briefly about what you said about ancient time. And again, it made me think about the idea of Sankofa, right? To go back to those to what you know culturally, what's been passed down with the emotional emancipation circles. They started with saying, was it like 4,000 plus people needed to be alive in order for you to be here today, right? So going from your parents, grandparents, great-grandparents. And that's really profound as you look at that number. And then also Maya Angelou and Oprah Winfrey, right? They also say, I come as one, but I stand as 10,000, right? So it's again, this thing that you are connected. You are not here as one person, that the wisdom, even how they move, how they talk, right? Like all of that is still with you. And that's a wealth of knowledge. And I'll just say again, with the young people and even with the wellness store that we're creating, we're trying to create, and thank you with the funding of the Nagata Foundation, we're trying to create these tools that get at that, right? That brings the cultural wealth that many people already have, right? In these communities, they already know how to be well, right? They already know how to heal trauma. And so how do you marry that with the latest that we know about neuroscience, body, mind, and then create new knowledge that's healing, that's transformative, that can dismantle different systems. So that kind of came up when you talked about this ancient time, and there's this wealth of information that's there and that we can tap into.
Yeah, beautiful. And maybe just to add to that, when you also just spoke about this again, that we are part of the planet. I had a moment of just breathing out and just feeling how it would be to move every step of my life as part of something bigger, not alone. And it reminds me of the beautiful practice that we will also be sharing during the summit, the global social witnessing practice, where our embeddedness, we practice our embeddedness by bringing close the news from the world, not by just connecting to it intellectually, as Matthew, you were also speaking, how painful in a way that is, but really connecting to it, allowing it to land deeply in our bodies, in our hearts, and connecting to it from there. Also seeing, of course, what it brings up in us, but what the intimacy that these kind of practices can bring to our world, where we are part of the planet and we are worth seeing by others. I'm remembering like our last global social witnessing event in the Pocket Project was 5 people in the Ukraine sharing about their experience right now in the war, how it is for them. And it's being with that, being with them. And all of them said like this was just, it was like medicine, feeling that you are interested in actually knowing how I am right now. That I'm not just, I don't know, 400 people being bombed somewhere. I am a person and you want to know how I am right now. So that kind of intimacy, also inter-being intimacy across the globe just inspires me right now. Thank you.
Gosh, I would just like to add how important the relational work is also for, social change systems. In my work with the Collective Change Lab, that is really one of the core aspects, looking at the how, you know, system practitioners are really coming up against trauma, and they can recognize it. And it is in how we can transform the relationships between us, our capacity to relate, that we can then, you know, start to become more capable of offering precisely this kind of connection that is in itself already healing, you know. And one more thing that comes from the summit, Bayo Komalafi, I remember this stayed with me: slowing down, not as a function of speed, but as a function of consciousness. That really stays with me. Yeah, and Matthew, I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to add.
Just to say that this work feels revolutionary to me. It was Brian Dorries, artistic director of Theatre of War, who made this point. He said that Zoom, it's like the global amphitheater. And just like 2,500 years ago, the Greeks started to discover tragedy and drama and how that changed the consciousness of their whole society and civilization. I think we're on the cusp of something similar. If we bring these relational practices, this understanding of group coherence, this ability to really channel collective intelligence serving this evolutionary impulse, we can change the world. And they will look back in 50 years, 100 years and think, wow, that was history in the making. So to be part of this is an incredible honor, and I can't wait to watch the rest of the summit.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's very lovely. Also, Matthew, like what you said now is like how through filling the virtual space with sensing and attunement grounds technology through our embodiment. And I think that's really an important thing to understand, that every new innovation, so there's innovation from the future, like that's all the high tech and all the things that we are developing, or science breakthroughs, like all the new things that are landing in us. So that's one, and that's very sexy. But the innovation from the unintegrated past, like all the learning that we didn't get, all the unintegrated parts of ourselves are learning or expansion of our perspective that we didn't harvest yet. We couldn't harvest because in that moment we couldn't integrate the experiences individually, ancestrally, collectively. And so I deeply believe first that the time of it Zoom, or Zoom as a representation of this interconnectivity through technology, and that we have to ground it through our bodies, through sensing. So to fill the virtual space with warmth and relationality, I think that's very true, that's a historical breakthrough. And the other thing is, when you spoke about bios, came up now a few times, I think also that one function of trauma is that the speed of life through the traumatic stress is heightened sometimes, and slowing down seems counterintuitive sometimes when we are in a crisis. But that everything that comes up inside of us, according to an external crisis, is one thing. So dealing with the inner aspects and integrating those makes us more resilient to deal with the crisis. And so the function of reflection, digestion, integration, which is basically space, which is basically slowing down sometimes, is needed, even if it seems like running faster is the first choice. And maybe we can take a moment now for all of us, since I think we shared a lot. Maybe just take a few minutes to have some digestion space here, not just to talk about it, but to really have some of it, and let all the things that we heard and that came up through the conversations and the sharings that everybody brought in. Let's take a moment to reconnect for everybody who wants to your body, and see how the different voices that you heard, different aspects, qualities, speak to you. some of them more than others, some of them contradict your own experience, and we make space for that too. And that everyone has a few moments to let the information of the conversation drop in a bit more. Also see what inspires you, sparks your own creativity, contemplation, thinking. To rest a bit in the echo of the conversation. To notice how some of the aspects you listen to relate to your own individual, ancestral, and collective journey. And also spoke about gathering your tribe, like the part in all of us, or the part in you that feels a calling anyway, that is interested anyway, that feels a drive anyway. It doesn't need to be ignited, otherwise we wouldn't be here now. It is already a flame that's burning. For a moment to feel that internal motivation, because that's the collective drive, that's a collective motivation that we feel together, that it's our collective responsibility to heal together in order to make the world a house. It is a house for us. Because it consists of all of us. Well, so I want to thank all of you, Rochelle, Laura, Ruby, and Matthew, for devoting your time and your energy and your passion to be here with us and to be in all the interviews. Thank you so much. And also all the other hosts, and Angel and Robin And so I hand it back to you, Kosha. I think you have some final remarks for us for today.
That is correct. Thank you so much, Thomas, for facilitating this preview event for the summit and also for being the fire and the motivation behind these collective trauma online summits. Yeah, and thank you again to you, Ruby, Matthew, and Laura for being here with us today in this conversation. So the live broadcast of the talks begins on Wednesday, September 28th, and goes on for 9 days. And as Matthew says, turn off your social media, or maybe not completely, but turn off the news and turn on the summit. Every day of the summit will feature 6 or more new talks, each available for 48 hours to stream for free. And those who've signed up for the summit will receive an email announcing the speaker lineup for each day. If you're just finding us today and would like access to all the free talks, please visit our website at collectivetraumasummit.com to sign up. We also invite all of you to tell others about the summit. Anyone can join at any time throughout the event. If you would like to have full access to the recordings of the summit, you can purchase the upgrade package by clicking the button below this video or the link in the description box. The upgrade package includes lifetime access to over 50 talks in video, audio, and written form, as well as over 20 speaker bonus gifts, a self-study course with Thomas in the foundations of collective trauma, and a live workshop with Thomas on ancestral healing, which will take place at the end of the summit. And all of this at a savings of 50% off during the summit. How can you resist? Again, just click the button below this video or in the emails we send you. And just to say, buying a package also helps us spread the summit to more countries and more audience. So you're really supporting us by buying a package. The summit's partner organization is the Pocket Project. We've spoken before about it, and it was founded by Thomas and Judith, his beautiful wife, and I have the honor of currently leading this non-profit organization and global initiative that aims to restore the fragmentation of our communities and societies by addressing and supporting the integration of collective and intergenerational trauma. Basically, we're building pockets of healing that become able to digest pockets of trauma. And you can learn more by visiting the website pocketproject.org. We will have some exciting preview clips coming soon from interviews of our amazing summit speakers, and we'll email you with access to those soon. I just want to end with something that Thomas said today, which I feel gives us hope beyond hope. So there's a hope in coming together in this movement. But Thomas also said today that there is the missing ethical learning that is hidden in the ice of collective trauma, and that this can give us the wisdom and the tools that we need at this time. Liberating that life energy is what we need to build the new world. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you during the live broadcast starting September 28th. Bye for now.